I'm Hailey Gifford, a junior at Hastings College, and the question I have is, how do you decide which gaps in the archive should be left open? And which ones do you attempt to imaginatively reconstruct through the retelling of stories? How do you sieve through the official historical documentations to uncover the gaps in the archive?
Yeah, a very good question, and one that I'm always thinking about and one that I'm always asking myself, both while I'm researching, but also when I'm actually making the work and I'm making decisions while I work. I don't think we really think about how history is made and written and kind of like made solid in a way. For me, it's like when I go to a museum and I read the history or description of an object, I always try to remind myself that this was written by a person who looked into the history of this object and then is framing it in a certain way. And there is a perspective, there is a point of view, and there are things that are included and things that are not included. Even when it is official historical documentation, there is always going to be bias there. It really depends on who's writing it, why they're writing it, who they're writing it for. So I try to keep that in mind and then also realize that when I'm making work about this, I am also adding my own history to the official record because I am responding in a certain way. People might believe it as fact, others might not, others might question it, particularly when there is very little historical documentation. So in a lot of the projects that I work with, there are these gaps that exist. And so I feel compelled to kind of respond to that. And through my making, I'm also adding to that record. So if there is a gap that exists and then my artwork comes up to kind of like fill that gap, I do see that as very valid documentation of a history and kind of like the story of a place, an object, a person in time. And so often I think about my work as an alternative primary record or secondary record maybe, and kind of like a resource for other people. So I've actually, like a lot of the research that I did for the Adari work, I've shared with other artists because they were also interested in looking at it. So for me, the research aspect and the work come together as a package and can offer this insight, this perspective on a moment in time. And I'm very interested in sharing that, like that being accessible to other people, just in the same way that I went out and found whatever was accessible to me. I always think about it in that way. And then when approaching actually kind of like, decision making, when it comes down to, after I've identified what this gap is and trying to figure out what that response is, it really depends. I mean, I think in the Adari work, creating these sand tablets, the whole idea was that I wanted the viewer to be able to insert themselves into this history as well. So by attempting to learn the history and kind of like reconnect or remember this place that is, so fragile in a lot of people's memories, you are adding your own recollections essentially to it and allowing for that to take its own form within your mind. So in that work, I'm very much interested in having people create their own story fiction, because it really began that way with me. Like I still don't know if my experience of that spring was real or not. So it feels very real to me now because I've remembered it and I've like told it so many times that I've maybe have lied to myself enough that it became real. In other cases where I'm maybe working with, actual official documents, I'm very interested in kind of like the process of redaction, which, is something that we see to this day. I mean, it's very much present. So this is a process that, we're very familiar with and in a weird way take for granted that it's normal. But there's also the kind of like the opposite of that. So there's the revelation as well. So it's really about working between these two things. So like figuring out what maybe can like be redacted in order to kind of like bring more attention to something else, maybe in like a positive way. I don't know if that really works that way, but like in some of the cases that I'm in some of the documents I'm working with now, like I'm actually like redacting all of the text that is unnecessary. So like all of the filler words, and because taking out all of the words that don't have any, are not calling out something directly that should be known, but it's kind of like just there to support. So then you're only left with the information that under normal circumstances would have been redacted. There's no one way to do it. And I think it really depends on what material I'm working with, how available it is, how difficult it is to kind of even grasp or like think about. And then, yeah, always remembering that the audience is always going to have the last word in that reconstruction. So you can present things, but then when people come to experience it, it will change again in a lot of ways that you don't expect. So that's something that I would always keep in mind and document as well, if possible, because then you can, again, use that to inform your own work and maybe develop it some more, or also add, if your intention is to add to a record, other people's perspectives.
Thanks for checking out this GEEX Shorts episode. This is just one of 10 chapters featuring the speaker's artwork, artistic practice, and direct conversations with the community. The full-length video, only publicly available for a limited time, can be found in the GEEX Talk subscriber archive, where you can also discover hours of content on even more contemporary glass artists and researchers. As a BIPOC and artist-led organization, GEEX redefines the culture of contemporary glass by canonizing artists and thinkers who have been historically marginalized in the field. If you'd like to support this effort, subscribe to GEEX and gain access to exclusive content. For more info, visit geeks.glass/support. Thanks to this episode's sponsors, listed on screen and in the video description below.